We're going to talk a little bit more here about the oil tank for the Yamaha YL1. I know I've talked about some of these items before, but the cap for the oil tank and the associated parts, I think those are all okay. If I do anything, it'd be replace the cap. You can find most of these parts on eBay, though they're not available through Yamaha anymore that I'm aware of. The oil sight glass, that's been a bit of a problem for me. You can find them on eBay. They're fairly rare. No longer available from Yamaha. I think what I'm going to do, as I believe I mentioned earlier, is I'm going to continue to try to polish this and get this as clear as possible. I've got quite a bit more work to do on the sight glass. The fitting, the drain fitting that goes up into the bottom of the tank, I'm going to keep that, just replace the gasket. Probably have to make a gasket for that. Let's talk a little bit here about the sight glass. This is a component that goes inside of the sight glass. It goes something, it'll look something like that when it's all installed. This is in very good condition. Those are available on eBay. There's a lot of them out there. They're not terribly expensive, but what I think I'm going to do is clean this one up. I might have to replate it and retouch that red dot in the middle. Plating it is easy to do. That's very academic actually, to zinc plate this, clean it up and plate it. The red dot is something that's got to be thought through a little bit, because remember, this is immersed in oil. And though I don't know what, that's probably a paint that Yamaha originally used, probably just a lacquer-based paint, wet coat paint that they touched in with a brush, and it seems to hold up pretty well. But I'm not going to be satisfied with that. I'm concerned that any paint that I would put in there to replace that red, because that will have to come out to be replated, it'll have to come off, will not hold up to oil. So I got some thoughts on how I'm going to do that, replace that red dot after I replate this part. The gasket, I think I can reuse. That goes behind this big nut, something like that. This is in very good condition. It's not tore, it's still flexible. Not available from Yamaha either. And this nut, again, not available anymore. Can find them on eBay, a little bit rare. This one has a little bit of wear to it, where I use that brass drift here and here to get it loose. I thought initially this might be chrome. I don't think it is. I think it's just zinc plated. Regardless, what I'm going to do is clean this up. I'm going to, file it here, smooth it off. It's a little rough on the surface. I think I'm going to clean up, touch up these edges here with a file. And then I'm going to try to replate it. I really don't have anything to lose, because it's not really usable the way it is now. For reconditioning, it would be fine. For restoration, it's really not in good enough condition, in my opinion, to use as is. So I have nothing to lose trying to replate it. And if that doesn't really work out for me, I'll have to see if I can't find one on eBay. I'm going to start with this little sight glass plate here. I'm going to strip the paint off. I'm going to clean it. I'm going to replate it. And then we'll come back to this, and I'll show you what my next step will be to try to replicate that red circle. Now I'm going to go ahead and finish the restoration of this little backer plate for the oil tank sight glass. If you recall, originally had a red dot in the middle. I think that was just a standard lacquer-based paint, because it came right out with a little brake cleaner. I did replate this on both sides, cleaned it up, so the only thing I have left to do now is to replace that red bullseye. Now how I'm going to do that is I'm going to use clear epoxy, two-part epoxy, in a little red paint. You can see here. The reason I'm going to do that versus just taking and putting a spot of red paint in the middle is I'm concerned that modern paints are not going to hold up to being immersed in oil. Keep in mind, this sits inside of the oil tank and will usually be covered with oil. And even though the original paint survived, I'm not confident modern lacquer-based paints, which all these rattle cans are, they're a solvent or lacquer-based paint, will hold up to being immersed in oil. So what I'm going to do is use some epoxy and a dye it red with the paint. Epoxy is very durable, and I think that'll hold up much better than just the paint alone. Little side note here, I don't know if you noticed, caught some poison ivy about a week and a half ago. I was out trimming the tree line around my property, which is full of poison ivy. And I've avoided it all summer, but wouldn't you know it, the last tree trimming I did this year for the fall, caught a case of it. It's much better now than it was a week or so ago. It's on its way out. Anyway, let's get back to this little plate. All it's going to take is a dab of each of these components. There's two parts to it. Make sure my little plastic tray is clean. I've had this epoxy for a long time. It's probably well beyond its shelf life, but I'm going to use it anyway. So I'm going to do about a 50-50 mix here. And the first thing I'm going to do, take a clean X-Acto blade and mix that thoroughly. I don't know if you can see that there or not. I think that came off the nozzle of the epoxy. This is a slow setting material. I think it's supposed to set overnight or 8 hours. So I'm not in a rush here. I don't have to worry about pot life for the purposes of this little demonstration I'm doing here. I'm not going to need all of that, so I'm just going to get some of it out of the way. Not going to need anywhere near all of that. I'm going to clean my knife off. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to stain it red. I'm going to take this red paint, which I've had since last winter. I always label my paint so I know how old they are. I'm just going to spray a bit of this paint into the lid here, or the cap. And then I'm going to take a paintbrush and wick up some of that. Put it right into that epoxy like that. Then I'm going to mix that up. Again, what I'm attempting to do here is stain that epoxy red using the paint. Again, I don't need very much of it. Now, I'm just going to clean my paintbrush a little bit. And just dab that into the divot. In the middle of the sight glass plate. Like that. I think you can see that there. I think all I did at the factory is take a little paintbrush and paint and do exactly what I'm doing right here. Now I'll just let that dry or set up for a day or so before I assemble it into the sight glass assembly and back into the oil tank. Here's the actual sight glass for the oil tank. I've pretty much finished polishing it up, and I've gotten it, I think, as good as I can get it. Now, I'm not going to show you the entire process that I went through to get the glass in the condition you see here, simply because I didn't do it all at one time. I did it in bits and pieces as I was in between other projects, waiting for paint to dry, draining oil from an engine. I'd come over and work on it for 5 or 10 minutes to go back to something else. So it really would have been real inconvenient to record that, so rather I thought I would just walk you through a little bit the steps I used to get it in a shape it's in here as you see it right now. Now, this part is not available from Yamaha. You can find them on eBay occasionally, and they're real expensive. I think I found one a week or two ago, and I think they wanted $35 for it. The buy it now price is $35, which I thought was outrageous. So I'm going to attempt to reuse the original. I think I shared with you before, there's a bit of a crack in it. It does not go all the way through. See it right there? And it does not leak, because I've tested it and it does not leak. So the process I used to recondition this glass is I started with multiple grades of sandpaper. You can see some of them here. I started with 400. I did not wet sand it, I dry sanded it. I went from 400 to 600 to 1,000 to 1,500 grit paper. This is the actual paper I used. It was just a matter of sanding it like you'd think, to get the worst of the damage or some scratches in it, cloudiness like you'd see in a modern plastic headlight on a car. So the sanding was just to get the worst of that out. Then I went to my Dremel and I used this polishing wheel. Now I have several different Dremel soft polishing wheels. I started using this one first, which is fairly hard. Did not work well. It created too much heat and had a tendency to want to melt the plastic, so I didn't use this one very long. This soft one is the one I ultimately used, with a blue polishing compound, which is made for plastic. And essentially what I did was this, and I'll demonstrate briefly here for you. Put a little compound on a wheel, then I simply polish the wheel like you see there, or polish the glass. Then I went around the outside edges like this, work my way around. Etc. And just kept working it, a little more compound, kept working it. I can do the inside, or did do the inside like this. This wheel or pad did not have a tendency to overheat the plastic and melt it. It would, I suppose, if you got aggressive enough. But it worked out really well. So I did that for probably half the total time actually I spent on this part, which is probably an hour. I might have spent an hour on this. Once I had it polished up with the Dremel wheel and compound, then I switched to this Plastic X polish. I'm not necessarily recommending McGuire's over any other plastic polish. I've used this for a long time, and it really works well. And that puts the final polish. I'm going to have to do it again, obviously, after using the wheel, but that'll put the final polish on it. It's easy to use, and provides a really nice finish when you're done. So that's really the steps I went through. Sandpaper, polishing wheel on a Dremel with blue polishing compound, finished off using Plastic X clear plastic cleaner and polish. Great product. And it came out as you see here. That's as clear as I think I'm going to be able to get it. I can't get the yellow out. That's permanent, that yellowing. But what I did manage to do is get it to be nice and clear. And if for some reason in the future I'm not happy with it or it starts to leak, then I'll go out and see about buying a new one on eBay. But I want to share with you the process I went through to clear, polish up and bring a clear back to this sight glass.